Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
4 radioactive contamination events at Koeberg in just over 2 weeks are raising fresh questions about safety at South Africa's only nuclear power station. Now, Eskom and the nuclear regulator insisting that no radioactive material escaped into the environment, that nearby communities were never at risk. But repeated failures during maintenance, I think, does demand closer scrutiny. And in that respect, I'm going to talk now to Velaphi Ntuli, who's Eskom's chief nuclear officer. Velaphi, a very warm welcome to you. So 4 contamination events in little more than 2 weeks. Why should South Africans believe that Koeberg is safe?
In an outage, we perform over 20,000 activities, and a limited number of those result in a localized airborne radioactivity. So it is expected. It is not something that is not expected. All right. Such activities, we plan for them appropriately, and we have diverse mitigations that we put in place to ensure that we manage the airborne radioactivity properly, to ensure the worker, the safety of our workers, public and environment. And I'd like to assure you and assure the South African public that there was never an instance when the airborne radioactivity material was released to the environment, as our containment is purposefully built for, to keep all the material inside containment because it's under negative pressure. The slightly elevated levels of radiation that we have seen, and I'm happy to go to each and every one of them, but, broadly, the slightly elevated and localized levels of radiation that we have seen, only 4 workers were exposed between 11 and 20 microsievert, and you contrast that to 20,000 microsievert, which is our annual limit, about 100 microsievert that you get if you do a X-ray, and about 400 microsievert that you get when you do a mammogram. So what am I trying to say? I'm not trying to minimize that we did have an elevated or slightly elevated radioactivity, but it was well within, what the limits are, and it is course of business, So I don't want, to have a perception out there or to leave a perception out there that, is alarming. Thank you.
Could I ask this, and you'll correct me if I'm misinterpreting it, but the repetition, does it point to a deeper failure in maintenance, planning, or safety controls?
Yes, so there was no repetition. So if you can allow me, then I can go through the incidents.
Thank you.
The first incident of the 30th that's been spoke about as an incident, it was not a radioactive incident, so an airborne radioactive incident. So when we work in containment, we are issued with what we call electronic personal dosimeters, all right? Those are programmed for 2 things: the intensity of radiation and the amount of dose that you get in containment. So one of our workers, and we know that there are hotspots within containments where if you can get closer to that hotspot, you pick up, higher radiation dose, then you have to move away. So that was the alarm that happened, so that incident really has nothing to do with airborne. The second incident is the one that has to do with airborne, where one of our portable ventilation system became defective, the power cord became bent, and therefore, there was elevated or slightly elevated airborne incident. And there were 31 workers in containment at that point, which we withdrew and we tested them, and their levels were low. All right. Then the third incident that I would also like to mention, well before we have monitors that are monitoring, and well before we saw an increasing trend, the workers were withdrawn. And why is that happening? Because we know that we expect this. The activity that we are doing, we know that it induces this, and therefore we stop work and withdrew. Then the last incident, exactly the same. You can't say when you stop driving your car while the oil life of the car is still 40%, and you're saying the oil has failed. So because we knew that this is coming, the levels are getting high, we stop the activity, they subside, and then we continue working. So it's not a failure or any incident at all. So
I do understand
that
it.
clarifies
No,
it.
it does clarify it. In spite of the mitigation that you've outlined to me, though, do these events raise any questions, in your opinion, about granting Koeberg another 20 years of operation?
No, it does not. And the reason that I would say that is the activity that has led to the slight levels or increased, as I said, is expected. It is done when we do our steam generator eddy current testing. That is a worldwide activity that nuclear power plants like ours do. And these measures that we put in place is exactly the same. So maybe you might ask that developer, what is different? We've never had this 2 years ago. What is different in this case is that we have just put in these new steam generators, and the work that it takes for you to put in these steam generators, it had shown that the cycle after you have put in the steam generator, you have a bit more activity in your primary system than normally. So after a few cycles from now onwards, our primary system will be more and more cleaner, for the lack of better word, and these levels of activity will then subside. So
could you explain to me how this entire series of events is being investigated? Because it would raise the question about whether Eskom itself can objectively investigate its own safety performance.
Absolutely. So how? Maybe just to give you a view as to how we work at Koeberg. Any event that happens, we raise what we call a condition report. The regulator has access to all of these things that we raise, and they then independently do their view. If they want more material, they will come to us and say they need this, but they have access to, where all this information is documented. So they will continue to investigate and do their investigation. Internally, we have, independent organizations that will then have a look and, independent of the main groups that are involved, do an internal independent investigation. So far, then lastly, we belong to an organization that is called World Association of Nuclear Operators. We report on this, they will ask for reports and they will do an independent review. And then any nuclear incident, it's rated on an inner scale. So that's a scale that we use for any incident from Fukushima, from 3 Mile Island, to what we have to say, where is it? And this registers as 0, meaning that it's non-consequential, it's minor. And I'm sure that everyone, that once they've looked at this, they will come back to the same conclusion. So we are very transparent and open for that scrutiny.
Thank you very much indeed. That is Velaphi Ntuli, who is Eskom's Chief Nuclear Officer.